Welcome to Alabama Manufacturing Now, hosted by Alabama Technology Network, a podcast where we cover a wide array of challenges, solutions, and innovations for manufacturers. We're your host, Whitney Barlow, Supplier Development Manager. And I'm Paige Caulfield, Marketing and PR Manager. Hey, welcome back to Alabama Manufacturing Now. I'm Paige Caulfield. This is Whitney Barlow. Today we have Jim Searcy here. Jim, it's so nice to have you here. Good to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. We're just going to jump right in this morning. Jim, can you tell us a little bit about your role as the Executive Director for the Economic Development Association of Alabama?
Sure. We're a two-person office. It's probably easier for me to tell you what the Economic Development Association is. It's EDAA, and that's what I'll refer to it in the future. As a matter of fact, I've gotten so used to saying EDAA and rarely hear Economic Development Association of Alabama.
It's wordy.
I was at a meeting, and they were recognizing different organizations there, and they said, and the Economic Development Association of Alabama. And I was sitting there, I was, obviously not as engaged as I should have been. And the guy next to me goes, "Hey man, that's you." And so I had to stand up. But yeah, the EDAA is a trade association. We are not an economic development agency. We don't recruit industry. We don't work with existing industry. We're singularly focused on improving the profession of economic development in the state of Alabama. We're an advocacy group. Our tagline is EDAA, the voice of Alabama's economic development, and that's what we try to do. We're highly vested in making sure that our members, our economic development members, are as equipped with the best and the latest information and the tools they have to go out and compete for economic development projects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the key priorities that you're seeing with economic development in Alabama these days?
It has been a priority for well over a decade now, and that's workforce development, trying to work within that area. There are a number of issues that we have played a role in the evolution of. Mm-hmm. But for years, and Whitney can attest to this, she was a practitioner, as was I, before I went to work for the association. Workforce has been a driving factor in companies' decisions to locate anywhere. And for years, we used the metric of unemployment rate. Mm-hmm. And, it was the goal was to have the lowest possible unemployment rate.
Right.
And then I think we're right at about 3.2% statewide right now. And, the many years ago when I was in economics, when I was in college, took economics, and it was explained to me that once you had 5% unemployment, you basically had full employment.
Correct.
And so we felt like, man, that, okay, we're doing great, and we are. But the reality is our problem is not a low unemployment rate. Our problem is a low workforce participation rate. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we've been working the last 2 years to try to address. And that's been an issue. That's a challenge, as is the availability of sites. Mm-hmm. That you can't, economic development for the most part is selling. Right. It's marketing. It's making sure that you've got product to sell. And we've been very, very successful, over several years. Consequently, a lot of our sites have been used up. Mm-hmm. They're just not there. Mm-hmm. And no matter how good you are as an economic developer, if you don't have something to sell, then you're not going to get that prospect to give you serious consideration. And you've got to be fully prepared. You can't go out and show just a piece of property and say, hey, this is where our industrial park's going to be. Mm-hmm. It's got to be prepared. It's got to have water, sewer, all the infrastructure to it, fiber, everything has got to be on site, because the company is not going to invest tens or 20 or hundreds of millions of dollars on something that, I bet you I bet you they can get water there.
Yeah.
They seem
It
like
has to be known.
yeah, those seem like a bunch of good guys. I bet they can figure that out.
They
So those two, I would say, workforce development and site development.
Okay.
That's funny. I bet they can get water there. You know, I have stood out in pastures where they're like, now, where's the water? And people have been like, well, it's a couple miles that way. We can get it there. And I'm like,
right.
and you're staring at what all it has to go through. And you're like, yeah, we can get it there in about 10 years. So
That's right.
Water is very important.
I'm not an engineer, but I know it's hard to get something under an interstate. And
yes, it is.
but I think that is one of those kind of things that, and there's some programs. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, the governor had a package of economic development bills called the Game Plan, and part of that established a program called SEEDS, and SEEDS stands for Site Evaluation and Economic Development Strategy. And I'm convinced that most people come up with an acronym and then just spend a lot of time trying to figure out words that go in
I agree.
to make that work.
I agree.
I do too.
Because SEEDS Act's great, but when you ask somebody, what does that stand for? I always have to think. I always have to go, site evaluation. So if you ever get stumped, call me, and I can roll that off to you. But what that program does allows for the state to work with communities to create and to improve infrastructure in industrial sites. Because if you think about it, and that's probably the biggest barrier to development sites is the cost. Because you're not doing it for a company. You're doing it to prepare yourself to go out and pursue a company.
Right.
And for a lot of, especially smaller communities or more rural communities, it's extraordinarily expensive. They don't have the resources to do it. This allows them to access state funds and match those so they can leverage what they can spend on investing. And you can do everything from acquiring property, developing property, but also the site evaluation portion of that is very important, because if you're going to spend a significant amount of money to develop a site, you want to make sure you've optimized the location of that site.
Right, of course.
So
Yeah, you don't want to be in a drought and buy a piece of property that's actually a swamp.
that's right.
And you just don't realize it is until the waters, until you get back into a normal cycle of weather and you're like, well, that explains what that dark line was on that tree. It was the water line.
It's like, what do you mean wetlands? It's not. It's dry as a bone out there. It is. It is until
it's not.
until November, and it starts raining, and then man, it's going to be probably till April. So,
And then you're like, well, that's not a problem. Oh, but it is.
and part of that process is when they're evaluating SEEDS applications, they bring in. It's not just one or two people going out and saying, hey, that's a lot of work. They bring in representatives from the Department of Commerce. They bring in Economic Development Partnership of Alabama, EDPA, and they really look at a consultant, comes in and looks at it and says, okay, well, this makes sense. And it's a lot, you can proceed with confidence, and the communities feel better because, the old saying about, oh, man, somebody with a briefcase who came from over 100 miles, they said it's what we ought to do.
And it's
Even if the economic developer knows that's where they ought to go, it validates what they're saying.
Yeah. Okay.
that sometimes is the biggest hurdle for an economic developer. So what emerging industries do you see growth opportunities for in Alabama?
They just completed the Catalyst program, which is the strategic plan for the state. And they identified those, not just emerging industries, but kind of where matched up our economic development strategy with those that we have the best opportunity to be successful. We had Accelerate Alabama. That was one that was done in 2012, the strategic plan that preceded this one. And it identified, as you might imagine, automotive, aerospace, shipbuilding, those types of things. And that's all been grouped into mobility in this new strategic plan, because if you think about it, that covers everything from automobile manufacturing or assembly, the suppliers, as well as the research and the development and the production of EVs. I think that's going to be something really important going forward. And I understand that there's I won't say controversy, but there's always growing pains when you're looking at that kind of technology being introduced. But you look at the investment made by your automobile manufacturers, and I think that the future is going to be electric vehicles. And so if we can be on the front edge of that, that'll be great. I think another opportunity that's emerging is logistics. And with all the talk, and how many times did you say supply chain before the pandemic?
Right.
And then how many times did you hear that term either in the pandemic or post-pandemic? And I think Alabama is well situated to pursue distribution and logistics because of our interstate system, our rail system. They just opened up a intermodal container transfer facility in Montgomery that will give an opportunity to enhance distribution around the state because it'll allow containers to come up from Port of Mobile and the state docks to Montgomery, be offloaded onto trains or onto trucks. And so it just makes it a lot more efficient. So I think that's that and our interstate system.
Yeah, we earlier this year we had a Southeastern Supply Chain Summit, and we had CSX and the Port of Mobile on a panel, and they discussed the collaboration. I guess it's cooperation too, but the collaboration that they're doing in Montgomery, and how companies in North Alabama and smaller companies that needed the port, but just the logistics of getting it to Mobile, how that's going to be able to really save time, save money for those smaller companies. And I thought, well, that's pretty impressive.
It is, because a lot of times it's like when you say the Port of Mobile, a lot of people, just citizens and just, they think of that as, well, that's Mobile. They don't really see a value to their local economy if you're, if you're in. Well, a good example, I was at the groundbreaking yesterday, and Speaker of the House, Nathaniel Ledbetter, who represents his district is DeKalb County, and he was talking about the positive impact it was going to have on industries in DeKalb County who were going to be able to utilize that. And if the port hadn't been an option before, now it is. So.
Yeah, it's really important when you're trying to get your Temu. I don't know why they think Mobile's just isolated. That's how we get our Amazon so fast.
It is. I mean, and it's spoiled us now. I can remember, and it may be a function of age, but I can remember when you ordered something, and it would be at the minimum 7 to 10 business days. Oh, yeah. And we're not moving anything on the weekends, guys. It's like 7 to 10 business days. And now, if I order something and it's like, it's gonna take it 3 days.
Right. Where's my
man? And
why is it not here the next day?
It's like, don't tell me you can't get it here by Sunday night.
It's not true.
No, you guys aren't trying. So
yeah, that's
you better expedite that shipping.
That's exactly right. Well, there are programs where you're supposed to have expedited shipping, but it's not working that way. So I'm excited that we're growing the port because now it will get here faster.
That's right.
Come on.
I should have told them as a Prime member, I'm really, really glad to see y'all do that.
Right. Okay, so I do have another. So we talked about emerging, and Alabama Technology Network is workforce. So I thought we probably should talk about some workforce training, yes, and how that works. So how is your association, the EDAA? And by the way, I'm really proud that you have learned all these acronyms for this podcast. I mean, you are now up to 4 acronyms and stating what they are. You're going to get a gold star, Jim.
Well, my goal is 7.
Okay,
so all
right.
I got 3 more to go.
Okay. But how are y'all working to address workforce development in the state of Alabama with economic developers?
Well, one of the things we do, and like I say, a lot of, part of our mission is advocacy. And we usually work in support of legislation. And this last legislative session, 24, they had the Working for Alabama, the Working for Alabama package from the governor, and that addressed specifically workforce, not just availability, but workforce participation. And it turns out, and I think a lot of people just fall into the trap of going, well, some people just aren't going to work. And that's true. I mean, there is a certain, percentage of the population, I think it's extraordinarily small, that just aren't going to work.
Right.
But what you look at is when you take a really deep dive into it, you realize there are a lot of barriers to work. And one of the most important aspects of that legislative package was the child care tax credit. And because, if you've got two children that are, below school age, and in order to purchase daycare for them, it makes it uneconomical
Right.
to work. I mean, you're going to work and you're going to have to find childcare for your child, and you're either going to be working for childcare, where it's just a wash, or it's actually costing you to work. And I know Whitney has had experience with that during your time in Chilton County.
Yes.
And it's not just, and the workforce tax credit, what that does, that allows companies to take a credit in order to pass an incentive, whether that is a stipend or something to their employees, to help mitigate the cost of child care. And there, it's just been rolled out, this year, but I think it's going to be a game changer as far as that goes.
I think so too. I think that we have discovered how many women, single women, are working, or parents. Let's talk about parents in general. Single parents who are the sole provider for the child or the children, and they are trying to figure out. So there's not someone else in the household that's taking care of the children. They're having to get them back and forth, and that is extremely stressful. And just because they go to school, it's still extremely stressful because, we're not going to get in this philosophical debate, but I was having this with my children who were not fans of this, but I'm like, y'all go to school from 7:50 to 3 o'clock, and we work from 8 to 5. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, because there's this gap where you're trying to still find, and supply and demand, the aftercare programs know that. And therefore, you also find yourself in the same predicament.
After school care, and then you have summer programs. They're out for 3 months. You still have to work, so you got to put them somewhere.
Yes, and they come in at a whopping $300 a week. Yeah. So it's like you're back in daycare again, and you're like, I'm going to need you to hurry up and get old enough to be able to stay at home. It's like a pay raise.
That's right. When somebody will tell you about your children, they grow up so quickly, and it's like, I hope so. I really do.
I really hope they do.
I need them to do that. So
let's just pass a couple stages and get to the grown-up part.
Right. Yes. So, but so now, what about talent retention? That's been something that we've really talked about in the state of Alabama. Is that we work really hard to grow these exceptional kids into young adults, and then they leave. And then we have great community colleges and universities and talent drawing companies that we bring them in, but then they don't stay. So how has anything being discussed about that?
Sure.
Okay.
And we work with a lot of state partners. And like I say, we're a staff of 2 at EDAA. But we work with BCA, we work with Manufacture Alabama, and some of our most important partners, obviously Alabama Department of Commerce, but the Economic Development Partnership of Alabama, EDPA, and they are specifically focused, or that one of their main focus is talent retention and attraction, because it's difficult. I think the attraction part, we're in pretty good shape. I mean, one of the outdoor recreation is one of those pillars that they're, and because I remember when they first proposed that, I thought, I don't understand. I don't understand. And look, I do that a lot where I go, I don't understand that. But the reality is that's a real selling point for a lot of people that are looking for, quality of life and work-life balance. And so that's important. But the retention is the real issue. Because if you think about it, if you come in to go to Alabama or Auburn or University of South Alabama, any four-year university or community college, and you avail yourself of that. Certainly, you pay tuition and you contribute to the economy, but while you're there, but then you take that asset, that education, and then you go away. Then at the end of the day, it's not really a long-term winner for Alabama. So if we can retain that, then I think we'll be in far better shape. And so what you're seeing is there's an emphasis, especially like in Catalyst, on what they call placemaking. And you've got, and I know that years ago, people were somewhat dismissive of quality of life. I mean, they're like, that's great. That's good to have, but that's kind of over there. Yeah. We need to make sure, that, hey, that's not going to make that big a difference. Well, and sometimes with companies it might not, but for their employees it does.
Yes.
And if you're trying to attract a workforce, being able to, give them a quality place to live, and enjoy all the amenities that are there to offer, I think it's a benefit for rural areas as well, because as we've improved our connectivity, as we've gotten more internet access, which if you don't have quality internet access, I don't care how good your site is. Yep. I don't care how many qualified workers you have. That's what drives a lot of it. But the more you have that connectivity, then you can go out and you can recruit companies, because they go in and see that smaller community, and they go, man, this would be an easy place for me to sell those employees now that I'm going to have to relocate, and certainly attract news.
Yeah, that's what when I was working in economic development, that would be the one thing I would tell my board is we want that 30 to 45-year-old family age parents who have young children, who are going to put them in the school, who are going to invest in their community, who are going to, spend their tax dollars here, because that's what you're trying to do as an economic developer, is get them to invest so that they turn those dollars in their community, so that the elected officials can have, better we can have better roads and better sewer and water and more connectivity in the internet. Yet another thing we never really talked about until COVID.
That's right.
I remember my first Zoom. It was, we talk about those like they're, just like when Facebook and social media came out, we created a whole new vocabulary. Now we have a whole new vocabulary with online meetings. And do y'all remember when we were trying to figure that out?
All I know is COVID shined a bright light. If you had poor internet, COVID lets you know how terrible your internet was.
Correct. And so it was a lot of awakening in. Well, for economic development, as bad as everything was, it really did shine a light on the things that you had stood on soapboxes for forever and said, if we can't get this done, this is, and they're like, no, we're fine. We're good. And then it was like, oh, we're not good. No, we're not. Right. So we've got school buses sitting in parking lots so that people can work on their schoolwork, and it's just craziness.
And the investment that has been made in this, because anybody that's in economic development or just has been a citizen, we've always known that we need to do it. It's just there's never been enough money to do it. And now I think now that it's become a priority, not just for economic development, but just for, everyone to have that connectivity and to have resources to put that in there. And it's, I think we've gone, I want to say from like 47th in terms of, people that have access to internet, or communities that have access to like 27.
That's fantastic.
Which is in a remarkably short period of time, and with a vision and with a intent to further that, get us to top 10, if not number 1. And so I think that's a game changer for these communities. You've seen it, I've seen it, we've all seen it in rural parts of the state. I mean, it was true. I mean, you'd see cars in the parking lot at McDonald's at 8 o'clock with the dome light on, and 4 kids in there working on the internet. And you're like, man, I don't know how to fix it, but that's a problem.
It is, yes,
And
yes.
so-
I lived in Mississippi, and when you're standing on the side of the road, I mean, when you're on top of a delta and a rice paddy and you have 5 bars, I'm like, there's no reason why we can't have 5 bars in Alabama. That was always, I'm like, if I can do it out there, it could be. Well, before I throw it back to Paige, I do have one more question that goes to placemaking in rural communities. How are y'all planning to, Design Alabama, placemaking, Main Street, all those fantastic programs we have in the state that I know that y'all partner with? I'm trying not to steal any of your acronyms, but that y'all partner with, that are stakeholders, that are partners. How is that collaboration working with rural communities? Because that is a challenge to establish where rural communities have the ability to enhance their workers, their incumbent workers, with workforce training, to be able to create the placemaking for new families to come in and feel like they can grow and establish their families there. So do y'all have anything on the horizon?
Well, obviously, there's the Alabama Growth Alliance that is passed as a part of the Working for Alabama last year. And what that does, that actually has as a priority placemaking, especially in rural communities, because I know a lot of people think of the major metros, the Huntsville, Birmingham, Montgomery, Mobile, perhaps Tuscaloosa and Auburn and micropolitan areas, but the vast majority of Alabama is rural.
Yes.
And so if we're really going to move the state forward, we have got to focus on improving those communities. And as the old saying goes, a rising tide raises all ships. And I think that's what you're seeing. So we work with Main Street, ACE, the Alabama Communities of Excellence. What is that? Is that like my number 6?
It is.
acronym?
I was like, look
Wow,
at you
we
go.
are creeping up, guys. We got one more.
For those of you who are keeping score at home, but Alabama Communities of Excellence, and like I said, Main Street, Design Alabama, all of them play a critical role. And you're actually going to have some funding available to actually help those communities take advantage of it. One of the things that EDAA does through our conferences and our professional development opportunities, whether it's lunch and learn, a quarterly educational event, or like I say, within our conferences, or whether it's something we're doing with the Government and Economic Development Institute at Auburn. And obviously, I work with ATN and Alabama Productivity Center. Well, thanks for coming.
He reached the 7. We are
I feel
done.
like my work is done here. So no, but you work with what we're doing with like ATN and the folks at Auburn to try to instill in those folks the importance of it and to convince them that they need to do a self-analysis, look inside themselves and as a community and say, here's what we want to be, but what can we realistically be? If you've got, a county that has 20,000 people in it, you're not going to get a 500 employee manufacturing plant if you're in, rural Southwest Alabama. But you can be successful. You just got to make sure you match your desires, your enthusiasm with things that are reasonable, and that's kind of where we put most of our efforts into making sure that they pursue realistically what they can achieve, but also recognize, let them think outside the box. That it's not just we see it specifically a lot of times in some of these smaller communities that had a single industry, like textiles, and so when those went away. But the answer is not. We need to find another 1,000 employee plant because you should learn that better to get 10, 100 employee plants than 1,000 employee plant. And your leadership is starting to accept that, especially in rural areas.
Yeah. So, what inspired you to pursue your career in economic development?
The acronyms.
Absolutely. I agree.
We should try to set our goal for 10 now.
Yeah,
that's right.
He's trying to surpass.
I know. I feel like I'm on a roll now. I'm like, oh man, don't stop.
We can start
now.
talking about all the grants you could apply for, and you'll blow it out of the park.
Absolutely. No, actually, I think, and keep in mind, I got into economic development 30 years ago, and it was a different a different time. And they're really, I think growing up and going to, going through public schools in Prattville and then going to Auburn, you don't really think about economic development, and it's basically pervasive.
Right.
And, if you see a new Whataburger open, okay, well that happened. Maybe they weren't recruited in, but because of the economic growth in that community, they all of a sudden had the rooftops and the disposable income that Whataburger said, hey, that'd be a good place for a spot, or a Chick-fil-A, or a Walmart, or a Dollar General. I don't know. I think you can just go in a field and say.
I think you can.
I think you can go in a field and say Dollar General 3 times, and it just appears.
It just pops
Just
up.
pops up like
But no,
genie.
in all seriousness, and I don't mean to make light of Dollar General. They're economic drivers in some of these really small communities.
Yes, they
That
are.
is their tax base, and they can't argue with success. I mean, they go, there's so many of them, and it's like, well, there's so many of them because
we're rural.
Because
at the end of the day,
we shop, and I love Dollar General.
I do too.
And it's like I tell my wife, they may not have what you want, but they got what you need.
that's correct.
And so I'm a big advocate for that. But I do think that what got me into it was a gentleman I went to school with named David Rumbarter was the assistant director at the Alabama Development Office, and I had no idea what economic development was. My degree was in public administration. But he said, hey, you ever thought about economic development? And I went, no. I've never even put those words together. So, man, good for you. And he said, well, look, we've got a project manager position open if you want to apply. And I was working in mortgage banking for Alpha at that time, Farm Bureau, Federated Guarantee. And so I wasn't looking for a job. So I filled it out and sent it in, and then it was like, okay, we'll come in for an interview. Then you had to make a video, and I was like, man,
Did you use your acronyms?
What did the video camera look like?
It was really more of a pantomime. It was like a shadow box. It was like, you ever seen like this is before talkies, and so it was like the little and they had somebody playing the organ over there on the side. But I went in, and I mean, again, I didn't know anything about economic development, and what they videoed was you giving a presentation to a company.
No.
And I'm like, I'm like, well, it's been a fun exercise. I've enjoyed it. Got to see David, catch up with him, and things. So, but I think it was because I didn't need the job. I was pretty, relaxed, and I think they thought, well, he's got to be better. I'm sure he can do better. So I got on there, and I think I do believe everybody winds up where they're supposed to be. And I will say this about economic development, and we do this with our young professionals. We do it with our internship programs, and we say there's not another profession that you can have a greater impact on your community than economic development. Look, I'm not smart enough to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, where you can have an impact. But I mean, if you think about when you ride by, if you're an economic developer and you ride by a parking lot, see all those cars in there. Well, if you didn't know anything about economic development, you go, well, look, I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad it's there. But if you're an economic developer, you ride by and you look at those cars, and those aren't just employees; those are lives that have been impacted. It's somebody's going to have a better Christmas.
Right.
Somebody's going to get to go to school or go to college that wasn't going to. They get a better house, or they're able to move up, and that's the kind of that's why I actually did it and why I continue to do it.
That's wonderful. So what advice would you give young professionals who are looking to enter the economic development field?
I think, and we still see that. Like I say, we have an internship program. It's the EDAA Ernie Coward Economic Development Internship. Ernie was a gentleman that was instrumental in forming that program, who passed away a couple of years ago. But we have, and you don't intern with EDAA. I know there are a lot of people that are disappointed that they don't get to
Work
just
with you.
hear my my pearls of wisdom on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But what we do have
I
is
would be.
we do have six participants in it. The Economic Development Partnership of Alabama Alabama Department of Commerce, Alabama Power Company, Spire, Power South, and South Alabama Gas.
Okay.
And so they hire them. It's an immersive internship, and we expose them to what it's like to do economic development. And we have people from all kind of disciplines. We've had engineers, accountants, finance folks, real estate folks, marketing people. I mean, we've had just a gamut. And I would just say that, if you're committed to making your community better and are willing to learn new tricks, and I think that's one of the strengths of Alabama's economic development. We have a lot of people been doing it a long time, but we don't get entrenched. We're able to embrace and accept change. And, like say the pandemic, it used to be you could, the ideal was you had a company that came in, if the state had them, they would go and visit 5 communities. They'd spend a week in Alabama, and they'd spend a day or two or a day and a half or half day, and they would visit these communities. And it was great. I mean, it was a good way to do business. You develop those relationships. And then as technology advanced, all of a sudden they didn't have to come in for a week. They could do a Zoom call, and or they could, they would come in and they weren't seeing what you were telling, or they were verifying what they already knew. They had gone online. They saw, okay, here's what your union participation rate is. Here's what your labor availability is. Here's what your unemployment rate is. Your educational components. Where are the training facilities in this community?
Here's your Facebook keyboard warriors.
That's right. Yeah, that you don't want them to find that group. And but it does make a big difference, because now, instead of getting them for a half a day, you might get them for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So
that would be correct.
You got to sell. You got to make sure that you're prepared. And I think the good thing about it is this next generation, this incoming generation, they are so comfortable with technology. I mean, I've had to learn it. They've grown up with it. It's second nature to them. Where I kind of felt like once we came up with the fax machine, probably ought to stop. Probably I was like, well, I can't get the microwave. I don't know, man. I can get a baked potato in 3 minutes.
Right.
What else do we need? And but now it's just, and that's been what's exciting for me, and why I continue to enjoy what I do, is because you do see the change in it, and it's. I think it's actually it's more challenging, but it's more fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Than when I first got into it. I mean, you can make a difference quickly.
And that's
probably use better cameras too.
Probably than the pantomime and the sock puppet.
Yeah. I was kind of hoping to go with a flip book, when you used to write stuff down, and then
you turn it and it would make it, animated. That would be
that would be cool.
When I am reaching that point in life where there's so many apps coming out that you're just like, look, I'm going to learn these. Y'all are going to teach me these, because I just don't have the capacity to keep learning these new apps. Like, I can only do to a certain degree. I get so tickled is because every time I'm like, do we really need an app for that? Do we really? And then, I was joking last night about technology, and I said, you can tell a younger person designed this because it doesn't have a remind. And it's something for your kids, so it doesn't send you an automatic notification that, hey, this is about to, expire or whatever. And I was very frustrated. I was like, why would you not do that? And I thought, I know why, because their brain was still at full capacity. They don't need a reminder. They don't need help reminding how to do things in life like you do as you get, more wise in age.
I'm just always impressed to watch somebody that's been texting their whole life, how quickly they can text.
It's so fast.
I mean, and I always pride myself on my ability to type. And now it's like, man, if I could, do it with 2 thumbs. And I also use punctuation.
Yes.
In my text.
No.
And that is offensive to some people.
Correct.
They will call back and say, hey, are you angry? And I'm like, no. Well, why did you use a period? I'm like, because it was the end of a sentence. Call me a renegade, but it's
Shout
like,
out English teachers.
Oh, look, see, and that's what it is. My mother, God rest her soul, she was an English teacher for 35 years.
There you go.
I'm like, I don't, what? If you're offended, I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna invoke the wrath of my my mother's spirit, because all of a sudden I decided not to use a comma. It's like,
No.
And I actually spell things out, like if it's okay, I write okay, because I'm not that busy.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll go OKAY instead of just
Oh.
okay.
I do the same.
Because,
I do the same.
yeah, so.
Because I feel like K is like you're a little irritated. And I'm like, what? Why
Yes.
can't you just say back, okay?
Okay.
I did. I said K.
Okay.
And I was like, no, that's not.
Yeah.
No, that's not. So where do you see the association emerging, not and evolving? We're using E's now. Oh, real quick. Alabama Development Office. Did it have an acronym?
It did. It did. It was.
But he reached his maximum, so he
It
couldn't
was-
use it.
Oh, okay.
I'm so glad you asked. Actually, it was the Alabama Development Office,
And it was
ADO.
ADO. Oh, we
ADO.
got another one.
And now now it is, we just refer to it as Commerce, because when they renamed, and they changed the name, God, maybe, I don't remember, like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And to the Department of Commerce. So people thought, oh, it's DOC. But Department of Corrections
Is
had,
also-
Is also
had already claimed
DOC,
DOC.
right.
So we're just like, let's just go with Commerce.
Let's go with commerce because we don't want to mix those two together. Again, back to the evolving of the economics, and you've already talked about all the change and things come in. So, and we, Alabama Technology Network, we have quite a few members of EDAA. So we see the advancement and things. So where do you see the association, like the board? Like, do they discuss those things about, so this is evolving technology, how are we going to keep our state and economic developers up to date?
Sure. And again, shout out to my board. We have an excellent board of directors for EDAA. Jamie Troutman, who's the economic developer in Coleman, is our current president. And and they have been very forward-thinking and very anticipatory of what's coming. I'd like to say, oh man, we're ahead of it. We know exactly what's going to happen. What we try to do is be as aggressive as we can be in trying to identify that technology that we think is going to have a huge impact. And then we try to convey the opportunities that creates for our members. Because, we talked about AI and, the prevalence of that. And everybody talks about AI. It's kind of like the cloud. I used to talk a lot about the cloud, and if somebody say, hey, what is the cloud? I'd be going, oh, I got a call. Let me put a pin in that. We'll circle back to that. But it's kind of like AI, and I think everybody knows that it's coming. And I think what we want to do is make sure that we equip, not just with AI, but any of the technological advances, any of the things that have become so ubiquitous to economic development. I didn't know what Zoom was.
Correct.
And now, and I pride myself on being able to put together a Zoom call. And nobody's impressed with that except for me. I'm like, hey, the fact that everybody was able to see each other and hear each other, I'm counting that as I don't care how badly the meeting goes.
No.
It's like, oh man, that was in science grand. What a great time to be alive. So, but I think that's what I see our role as, is making sure that we keep our economic developers and our associate members, people who have a vested interest in economic development, keep them as engaged and as competitive as they can be, because it's not getting any less competitive. Economic development is, there's not a more competitive undertaking out there.
That is very true. That is very true. Well, I pretty much have covered everything. Jim, do you have anything else?
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to do this. ATN has been a big partner for what we do, especially when we're providing information about resources to our members in some of, like say in rural parts of the state. That's been huge. But yeah, I've enjoyed the time I've had in economic development. I'm thrilled with where we've come from, but I'm even more excited about where we're headed. So.
Yeah, that's true. One other thing is when you're talking about in communities, my kids, because I'm an economic developer, my kids will tell you, that Chick-fil-A is here because the head count is so-and-so. And I'm like, yeah, you can tell children of economic developers because like you explain to them, because they're trying to figure out why is this town growing and this town's not. And so then you start explaining they also love P.F. Chang's and they want to know why Prattville doesn't have one. So I have
very good question.
Yes. So we had, that was where it started, was actually why that doesn't have one. And now it's every franchise, every store. So what does that require to come here? And I'm like, oh, I should have never got that started. So I'm raising economic developers.
No, you'll see that. It'll be, hey, we got it in Prattville. Well, we got a new chicken restaurant. We got a new chicken finger restaurant. And it's like, why don't we get P.F. Chang's? Or why don't we get Cheesecake Factory?
Yeah.
And I'm like, Birmingham is lucky to have a Cheesecake Factory.
Correct.
Yeah. And so, but, and you explain to people and, it's, and hey, it'll come. Maybe not in,
Right.
I remember when Target was a big deal coming to Prattville.
Oh.
Yeah. Man. And I told my mother, I was working in Birmingham and she was like, how come we can't get a Target? And then when Jim Byard, the mayor, and kind of got one, they Target decided to locate there. I called my mother and I said, you're welcome.
Thank you. I made a phone call.
That's
and looked
right.
at what I did.
It took me a while, Mom, but hey, we locked them down.
There you go. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate it. And y'all stay tuned and catch us again on Alabama Manufacturing Now. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe.